Tonight, once again, we take on and unravel one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history, D.B. Cooper. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Just search for The Michael Braa Show on Insta, Facebook, YouTube, or the KC CBS 47 Plus app. For over 50 years, we've chased the ghost of a man who vanished into a storm with $200,000 and no name. The FBI called it one of the most baffling cases in aviation history. The public called it a legend. Tonight, with the help of Mia, our modern investigative AI, we break down the evidence, reconstruct the crime, and challenge decades of speculation. We're not just retelling the myth, we're solving the mystery. This is the real story of D.B. Cooper. Let's begin with the man himself, not the myth. Not the nickname, but the figure who walked calmly into an airport on a cold November afternoon in 1971, bought a one-way ticket to Seattle, and vanished into legend. He called himself Dan Cooper. The name DB, that came later thanks to a reporter who misheard an early lead and ran with it. The real man never used it, but the mistake stuck, and so did the mystery. Airports back then were wide open. No metal detectors, no ID checks. You could buy a ticket with cash and board in minutes. It was the tail end of what pilots called the golden age of air travel. Champagne and coach, leather seats, and lately a troubling trend of hijackings. Cooper blended in perfectly. A white male, mid to late 40s, medium build, clean cut, hair neatly parted, no beard, scars, or quirks. Flight attendants described his skin tone as swarthy, possibly Mediterranean. He looked like he belonged, and he knew it. His outfit was just as precise: a dark suit, white shirt, black clip-on tie with a pearl tie tack, and of course the polished loafers. No gloves, no visible luggage, just a hard-sided black briefcase, the kind that said, "I mean business." But what really stood out was how little he stood out. He boarded the plane with a calm confidence, ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, and waited. Quiet, polite, gentlemanly. One flight attendant described him as very soft-spoken, almost fatherly. He smiled, he made eye contact, and he never once raised his voice. That calm wasn't just personality, it was performance. Cooper never fidgeted, never looked nervous, never checked his watch. He smoked and drank, but never appeared intoxicated. His voice was flat and neutral, deliberate, no accent. It was like he was erasing any trace of where he came from. He was building an illusion, not of glamour, but of forgettability. And it worked. Despite hours on the plane with him, even after he claimed to have a bomb, no one could later describe him with any clarity. The FBI's sketches were vague. No passenger remembered a scar, a limp, even a mannerism. He was a ghost in a suit, a man who left no metaphorical fingerprints. Anonymity wasn't a byproduct, it was the plan. And in the years since, experts have tried to pin him down. Some say he was a sociopath, methodical and detached. Others think maybe he had military or intelligence training. But the truth may be simpler. He didn't want to be known. He dressed to disappear. And in 1971, when the skies were open and the systems unprepared, that's all that was needed. He vanished in plain sight. It was the day before Thanksgiving, 1971, one of the busiest travel days of the year. Northwest Orient Flight 305 was scheduled to depart Portland at 2:50 p.m., bound for Seattle, a short hop, barely 30 minutes. The aircraft was a Boeing 727-100, a jet airliner with a unique feature, a rear air stair that could lower mid-flight. Designed for small airports, no one had imagined it might be used to exit the plane while still airborne. Dan Cooper, his name on the ticket, took seat 18C or 18E, depending on which version you read. No luggage, no fanfare, just a man in a suit carrying a black briefcase. And of course, he ordered the bourbon and soda, sat quietly, and waited. He handed a flight attendant a note. She assumed it was a phone number and tucked it into her purse until Cooper leaned in and said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." No shouting, no panic, just a quiet warning. She returned to sit beside him. Cooper cracked open the briefcase, and inside were red cylinders, wires, and a battery. It looked real. It didn't need to be more than that. His note, now lost to history, laid out the terms. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, 2 mains, 2 reserves, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. His tone was businesslike. No threats, just instructions. The crew relayed the message to air traffic control. Within minutes, the FBI, police, and airline executives were in motion. The order came down quickly: comply. This wasn't unusual. In 1971, there had already been more than 30 hijackings, most of them political. But Cooper didn't ask for Cuba or a manifesto. He wanted money and parachutes. That was it. Flight 305 circled Seattle for nearly 2 hours while agents assembled the ransom, bundled $20 bills, microfilmed for tracking, and parachutes from the local jump school. Cooper, meanwhile, stayed composed. He chatted politely with flight attendant Tina Miklo, who'd taken over as a point of contact. He asked for the cabin lights to be dimmed, meals for the crew, casual conversation, and casually mentioned that McChord Air Force Base was only 20 miles away, something that raised more than a few eyebrows. At 5:39 p.m., the plane touched down in Seattle. Cooper released all 36 passengers, along with 2 attendants. Most had no idea they'd been hijacked. The money and chutes were delivered. Cooper inspected the bills but didn't fuss over the gear. Then came his next move. He issued flight instructions that made no sense, well, unless you were planning to jump. South to Mexico City, keep it below 10,000 feet, 170 knots. Flaps at 15 degrees. Landing gear down, cabin unpressurized, and the rear air stair unlocked. The crew pushed back on fuel range at that altitude. Cooper agreed to stop in Reno. No argument, just calm negotiation. At 7:40 p.m., with rain sweeping across the tarmac and night falling fast, Flight 305 lifted off again. This time, only 5 people were aboard, and one of them was about to vanish. At 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off again, this time headed not for Mexico City, but straight into a storm. The crew knew what was coming. Cooper had no plans to reach his destination. Everything led to this: the jump. Outside, the night was black. Wind gusted at over 20 miles per hour, and rain slammed into the fuselage. The air at 10,000 feet hovered just above 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility, 0. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper called Tina to the back of the plane. He asked for the crew's instruction card and had her show him how to deploy the rear air stair. Then he told her to return to the cockpit and not to come back. From that moment on, Cooper was alone in the rear cabin. He began to prepare. He opened one of the parachutes and cut some of the lines, likely to secure the money bag to his body. He chose a military surplus parachute over a modern sport model, a decision later seen by experts as either a mistake or a sign of inexperience. He wore what he'd worn all day: a business suit, a trench coat, and leather loafers. No gloves, no helmet or thermal gear, just a man dressed like he was heading to a boardroom, not leaping into a storm. At 8 p.m., the cockpit light confirmed the air stair had been lowered. The crew radioed back asking if he needed help. His answer? No. 13 minutes later, at exactly 8:13 p.m., the aircraft pitched upward slightly, the kind of bump you'd expect if a man in a heavy bag of cash had just stepped into the night. No one saw him go. The storm obscured everything. Even the Air Force jets tailing the plane couldn't track him. Radar was no help either. Cooper was swallowed by the weather. The jump likely happened over rural southwest Washington near Ariel or Woodland. The terrain below was brutal. Dense pine forests, steep ridges, icy rivers, and logging roads winding through unforgiving wilderness. That night, it was soaked and freezing. Cooper had no steerable parachute, no altimeter or compass, no way to guide his fall or soften his landing, just gravity, wind, and chance. When the plane landed in Reno at 10:15 p.m., the air stair was still down. Cooper was gone. So was the money. All he left behind was a black clip-on tie, still looped around the seat where he sat. Years later, investigators would find traces of rare minerals, titanium, subsulfide, embedded in the fabric and possibly from an aerospace job, possibly nothing. 2 parachutes remained, one opened, one tampered with. His bourbon glass was taken. Dozens of fingerprints were lifted, none matched. By dawn, search teams were combing the forest. FBI agents, local police, and military personnel scoured 40 square miles. They found nothing. Not a shoe, a shred of fabric, not a dollar bill. Only silence. He stepped out of a jet and disappeared into the dark. The moment Dan Cooper stepped out of that jet and vanished into a storm, the story shifted. What began as a hijacking turned into something stranger. A man disappearing in real time, right in front of law enforcement, into the dark. By dawn on Thanksgiving Day, 1971, it was front page news. Across the country, man parachutes from jetliner with $200,000. But the facts were few, and in their absence, the myth grew fast. Reporters scrambled to piece it together. The FBI clammed up. And then came the detail that would define the case forever. A misprint. A local wire service confused the suspect's alias, and instead of Dan Cooper, they ran with DB Cooper. It was a simple clerical error, but it stuck. And somehow, DB sounded better, cooler, like a code name. And just like that, a quiet man with a briefcase became a folk legend. He wasn't described as a desperate hijacker or a dead man walking. He was dubbed a gentleman rogue, a sky pirate, mastermind. Never mind the lack of evidence for military training or skydiving experience, TV anchors, columnists, and barstool analysts filled the blanks. What couldn't be proven was simply imagined. The man who boarded that flight was unremarkable. The one who jumped, unforgettable. And America was ready for him.
My attorney suggested I call Atlantis Private Investigations. That was the turning point. Michael and his team got me the proof I needed to get my children back and secure our future.
I'm Michael from Atlantis Private Investigations. Let's talk. When you need help, your answers are here.
Hey, it's Kara, and welcome to Kara's Corner on the Michael Braa Show. We love outlaws. Not the violent ones, the smart ones. The ones who make the system look slow. That's what DB Cooper became. Not just a guy who hijacked a plane, but the blueprint for the modern anti-hero. And the truth is, he didn't even do that much. He got on a flight, asked for some money, and then vanished. That's it. But we made him a legend. Why? Because of when it happened. It was 1971 and the country was exhausted. The Vietnam War was still dragging on and trust in the government was at an all-time low. People weren't looking for a squeaky clean hero in a cape. They were looking for someone who broke the rules and didn't apologize for it. Look at who they were watching in the theaters. Dirty Harry, The French Connection, James Bond. These weren't role models. They were loose cannons. Reckless, flawed, sharp-tongued, and we loved it. So when a guy in sunglasses and a clip-on tie outsmarts the FBI and jumps out of the back of a moving plane, yeah, of course they're going to idolize him. He became a folk hero because he outsmarted everyone and left behind a story that no one could finish. And sometimes, that's all it takes. That's all I got for today. Thank you guys for coming to Kara's Corner, and I'll see you next time.
The early 1970s were a time of unraveling. Vietnam dragged on. Watergate was brewing, the economy was teetering, and trust in authority was fading fast. Then here came someone who didn't scream, didn't shoot, didn't rant. He asked for the money, got it, and walked off the grid. To many, Cooper became a symbol. Not quite Robin Hood, he didn't give to the poor, but something certainly close. A man who outwitted the entire system with style and vanished without a trace. Of course, that version was fiction, but it didn't matter. The myth moved faster than the facts. Soon, Cooper was on t-shirts, lunchboxes, and coffee mugs. Novelists wrote thrillers, musicians dropped lyrics, and comic books reimagined him as an anti-hero. And television has kept the mystery alive. Special after special, theory after theory. Every time the story risked fading, pop culture resurrected it. Meanwhile, the FBI was chasing ghosts. Leads poured in, thousands. Some say they knew him. Some said they were him. Others gave names, old neighbors, ex-boyfriends, co-workers. Some sounded plausible. Most were noise. One man mailed in a parachute and a note, "I'm done running." None of it held up. Inside the Seattle field office, agents created what became known as the Cooper Room. Maps, suspect sketches, flight data, photographs. The suspect list passed 800 names. It would eventually hit the thousands. But the problem wasn't too little data. It was that the man had left almost nothing behind. No confirmed fingerprints, no verified ID, no DNA. Well, his cigarette butts, potentially a gold mine in a modern lab, were tossed out before the science existed. The best evidence they had, that clip-on tie. And not only hinted at industry, but nothing to do with an identity. Still, the public couldn't let it go. Cooper-themed bars sprang up. A yearly festival in Ariel, Washington, cameos in the X-Files, Prison Break, even Loki, where he's reimagined as a trickster god. He became more than a suspect. He became an American figure. He left a mark on aviation. Within weeks, the FAA ordered a new mechanical device in Boeing 727s to prevent the air stare from being deployed in flight. Of course, it was called the Cooper vein. Quietly, securely, changed forever. But even now, decades later, we still talk about him. Not because we solved the mystery, but because we didn't. He didn't just slip through the cracks. He became the space between them. Over time, the man became the myth, and the myth became the story. We stopped asking what did happen and started asking what could have. Where might he be? What name might he be using? Was he living in a cabin off the grid or sipping drinks in Mexico, watching his legend grow? But peel back the legend, and you're left with what really matters, the physical facts. And those facts do not point to an escape. They point to failure. Let's start with the gear. Cooper chose a military surplus NB6 parachute, heavy, round, and designated for static line jumps, not for steering. He rejected a modern sport model that did offer control. Why? We don't know. But to experienced jumpers, that decision reeks of inexperience. Then there was the reserve chute, his backup. Of the two provided, he chose one that wasn't functional. It was a training dummy, sewn shut and clearly labeled. It was meant for classroom demos, not the sky. The other one was real. He ignored it. That's not the choice of a trained jumper. That's someone who either didn't know better or didn't care. Now look at what he wore. A suit, a trench coat, and leather loafers. No gloves or helmet, no goggles, no flashlight, compass, altimeter, or radio. Nothing for navigation. Nothing for warmth. Nothing for survival. He didn't even properly test how money was secured to his body. 21 pounds of bundled bills awkwardly tied with a parachute cord like a weight belt. And the weather? Brutal. It was late November, storming cold, winds gusted to 20 knots, visibility near zero. The terrain below, dense, forested, mountainous, and pitch black. Even elite skydivers at the time called it suicidal. The FBI's ground search began within hours. Helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, bloodhounds, military teams, but nothing. No parachute, no shredded gear, no body. No broken branches, not even a torn bank wrapper. 9 years later, something finally surfaced. In 1980, a boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand near Tennebar on the Columbia River. It's about 30 miles from where we believe he jumped. He uncovered 3 decaying bundles of $20 bills, $5,800 in total, all traced to the ransom. But the find raised more questions than answers. The cash was buried well inland beneath layers of silt and sediment in a spot untouched by direct river flow. Hydrologists, geologists, and forensic teams debated, was it planted there by Cooper or carried by the river? No theory has ever stuck. Then there was the tie. Left on his seat was a black clip-on tie with a pearl tack. In the early 2000s, forensic labs analyzed it using electron microscopy. What they found surprised everyone. Particles of titanium, sulfide, cerium, and pure aluminum, residues common in high-end aerospace manufacturing. Well, it led to new theories. Was Cooper a Boeing engineer, a metallurgist, a contractor? It fit until you remember the dummy chute, the sport chute he passed over, the suicidal leap. Why would someone familiar with aircraft ignore basic skydiving safety? Then there's the money trail. Every bill in that $200,000 ransom was cataloged. Serial numbers distributed to banks, casinos, racetracks, even the Federal Reserve. Yet aside from that one discovery on Tennebar, not one bill has ever surfaced in circulation. Not one. After all the theories, all the forensics, and all the documentaries and internet forums, what are we really left with? A man hijacked a plane, he got the money, he got the parachutes, he let the passengers go. He walked to the back of a 727, opened the air stair, and jumped into the night. He was never seen again. The most enduring theory, the FBI's official position for decades, is simple. He didn't survive the fall. Not because a body was found, but because everything Cooper did after the ransom suggests boldness, not preparation. He acted like a man with a plan, but not necessarily a plan that worked. He jumped into 200,000 acres of mountainous forest in the middle of a November storm with no survival gear. No plan for what came after. His parachute couldn't be steered, he didn't even know where he was going, and he was carrying a heavy bag of cash tied around his body with a parachute cord. More burden than lifeline. If he hit the trees, and in that part of Washington he likely did, it would have been like hitting pavement at speed. If he landed in a river, he'd be pulled under in seconds. And if he somehow managed to get to the ground uninjured, he still had no food, no tools, no sense of direction. Hypothermia would have come quickly. And yet, there was never a splash, never a scream, never a trace. Even if he survived the fall, he vanished without a footprint. No sightings, no accomplices, and no spending spree. The ransom bills were circulated to every bank, casino, and racetrack in the country, and aside from the decayed bottles that were found at the Tennebar years later, not a single bill has surfaced. This isn't the behavior of a man enjoying a stolen fortune. This is the silence of someone who didn't make it out. And in 2016, after 45 years and thousands of leads, the FBI officially closed the case. Not because they had answers, but because they didn't. D.B. Cooper had become a file, a ghost. Still not everyone agrees. To this day, a subculture of sleuths and hobbyists continues to chase the story. Some build replica 727 interiors to test the jump. Others comb satellite maps to track wind drift. A few hike the forest every year hoping to find something the Bureau missed. And there have been the suspects, the bragging paratrooper, a dead con artist, even a Boeing engineer with access to all the right materials. All intriguing, none conclusive. None explain why nothing was ever found. Every fugitive leaves behind something. Cooper didn't. And Cooper left nothing. Maybe that's not the mystery, though. Maybe that's the answer. The man who hijacked Flight 305 did not outsmart the world. He overestimated himself. That he believed the first half of his plan would carry him through the second. But nature doesn't care about style or confidence or legends. In the end, he didn't vanish into myth. He vanished into the trees. The facts about D.B. Cooper tell one story. A man who took a risk he probably didn't survive, who wasn't prepared, who miscalculated, and who most likely died alone in the woods, cold, wet, and forgotten. But that's not why we tell the story we tell. We talk about Cooper the legend, the outlaw and the trickster, and the man who got away. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Because sometimes, when the truth is small and hard and ordinary, the legend gives us something bigger, something we need. Because in a world that explains everything, Cooper remains unexplained. And as the old line goes, when truth and legend collide, we print the legend. Good night. Keep asking questions. I'm Michael Braa.
It's a mystery.